Good afternoon from Glasgow. I'm Rhian Lubin and I'm joined by TV presenter and wildlife expert Chris Packham. Thanks very much for joining us.
A pleasure.
Chris.
Pleasure, Rhian. Always good to get our heads together.
We're going to be talking about everything that's been happening at COP this week. If you have any questions, then just ask us in the comments and we'll do our best to get through all of those. So first of all, what do you make of how the first few days of COP has been?
I haven't been surprised by what's happened. Obviously, we were disappointed that certain key leaders didn't show. And I think it is symbolic. I mean, yes, they will say they sent their delegates and they're over there negotiating now and they're properly represented. But it's a symbolic thing that they didn't make the journey. I think we saw all the grandstanding that we expected to see, people swanning in and making big promises. And now again, those negotiators have to transcribe those promises into something meaningful. So we can be cynical, but I think we should also be patient and wait to see what happens by the end of next week or the week after, when that comes out. Sources of disappointment, obvious. Setting targets way too far into the future. It's all very well talking about, stopping deforestation in 9 years' time, but given that we lose 36 football pitches of rainforest every second, why wait 9 years? Let's get on with it now. And also, put some concrete, pledges in place to make sure that that's a feasible reality. Indonesia have already come out and said, well, the natural capital of our forest is worth more than all the money you pledged already.
Yeah.
Where is the incentive? They've flown home in their private jets and they've eaten their meat meals and they've made some terrible gaffes, but it's down to the negotiators now. Let's see what they come up with.
Do you think it should have been a vegan event?
I think it should have been a vegan event. I think symbolism is really important at this time. I think we like gestures, don't we? We like to see people doing the right thing. And if they do the wrong thing, they're immediately jumped upon and ridiculed. And in fact, although we might have started to ridicule them already, well, I have, it's not terribly productive. We would rather be congratulating people for getting things right than chastening them for getting things wrong. So, yes, of course, it should be vegan. And yes, they should have come here on the train. Obviously, there were security concerns for politicians and global leaders and all those sorts of things. But I'm sure that they could have been catered for with a far smaller carbon footprint. I don't know about Biden. I read that he'd taken 85 vehicles to Italy. Whether they then came here to Scotland, I don't know. But transporting 85 gas guzzling vehicles around the world to use it's just not a wise gesture to make when the eyes of the world are looking upon you for really, really important leadership at a very, very important time.
Yeah, there's a worry that we haven't set the best example, and as the host nation we should be, with things like just exploring the Cambo oil, for example, and so many other things.
Well, look, the week before, our Chancellor effectively discounted air passenger duty on internal flights, and we've all been looking at our lives, I think, and asking what can we do to reduce our environmental footprint. And one of the things that I stopped doing in 2019 was internal flights. I mean, it was too late. I should have done it before, and I accept that. But I arrived here on the train. I just think a lot of other people could have come here on the train. It was quite comfortable. I got quite a lot of work done, and they could have laid on special trains for those people if that's what's required. I just think it's about making those choices, sticking with those choices as and when they become available to us. Not everyone can jump at the same time. But I'm in a position where I can say, okay, I'm going to go by train. It's going to take me an extra day. That I'll have to factor that into my working diary because I'm no longer prepared to fly. But sending out those signals a week before this conference started. I mean, come on, guys. Let's try and put the right face on it.
Yeah, the domestic flights, it's difficult as well because when flights are so much cheaper than the train at the moment, it costs sometimes hundreds of pounds to travel by the train,
Indeed.
Whereas a flight can be £30-40.
Exactly, and that's what I talk about, people taking those opportunities when they become available to them.
Yeah.
And part of that availability can be affordability. I mean, I might also argue that I've changed my eating habits and I've got an electric car. The electric car that I bought was very expensive. I had to part exchange another one and so on and so forth to be able to afford it. Not everyone is in that position, but I'm not pointing at people who haven't got an electric car and saying, "Oh, you." What I'm hoping is that the price comes down, the usability goes up because the infrastructure is in place, and when it becomes available for people to take advantage of that, they make the right choice. We have to be patient. We can't all do what we might think is the right thing at the same time. And you're right about flying. There are price issues, but surely it's up to our government to start balancing that out. Investment in public transport, more sustainable public transport, is something that we need to do. And I would argue that probably isn't HS2 either. We could easily digress there. So let's move on.
Just on the flying thing, you've travelled all over the world in your career. It's a balance, isn't it? Because we have a duty to report on these things, and it's really important to go there and to see it and to report back. Have you cut back on those kinds of trips?
Yeah, I have. Again, so I used to lead tours overseas. So I stopped doing that. Again, the last one, which was booked 2 years earlier, so therefore I undertook my responsibilities, was in 2019. But I, in fact, had stopped doing them before that. Now, that does leave me with a bit of a problem, because I and many others have been supporting human communities through that ecotourism, bringing money into those communities. I've helped in Gambia grow a community of people who rely upon ecotourism, birds, as it turns out, and so initially that has gone into a slump. Now they've had COVID as well, so no visitors there. Ecotourism is important, but at this point in time, the reason why I've not returned to it is that I haven't found a method of being able to do so with a clear carbon conscience. But equally, I'm thinking, what about those people out there who are reliant upon our visitors' income, not to just sustain their human communities, but also to look after all of the wildlife that they look after, because people like me used to go there and show clients that wildlife. So I'm thinking that I might get some good heads and bang them together from the ecotourist community and say, what are we going to do about this? Are we really just going to say we can't fly anymore with a clear conscience, therefore we have to abandon all of these people, all of these animals, all of these reserves all over the world because we can't justify it due to our own carbon conscience? It's got to be resolved. At the moment I haven't resolved it, so I'm not tour leading. And when it comes to traveling for work, because I'm not a great one for holidays, so if I'm traveling using aircraft to go overseas, it's invariably for work. What am I going to do about that? Well, 3 times I investigated offsetting, and I went right into it because I thought, well, I've got to deal with this. What is there on the table? What's available to me at this point in time for me to deal with it? And obviously offsetting, this is going back a few years, was at the top of the agenda, but I could never really reconcile that it was real, that it was true, and therefore I never bought into it. Now I'm exploring a different type of offsetting, which is land acquisition with forest already on it, and so on and so forth, where it's acquired for indigenous peoples, where they're living in those areas sustainably. And the idea is that by paying for the acquisition of that, you are giving them and that habitat a long-term future, without being able to buy those sorts of places. And as we see in Brazil, many of those indigenous peoples are having their homes and habitats destroyed. So that's another thing that I'm exploring. It's got to be explored, and it's not easy. And that's why, again, I think we have to be tolerant and patient with one another as we go through this process of change, and ultimately we have to be kind to one another. I'd rather be applauding for someone for succeeding than chastising them and criticising them for failing.
Going back to some of these pledges we've seen this week, then there was one to cut methane by 30% from 2020 levels by the end of the decade, and over 100 countries so far have pledged to do this. We've also seen pledges on phasing out coal from about 40 countries. But not China, not the United States, not the big coal users, and Australia, of course, which is mining all of that coal, and it's integral to their economy. So again, I'm not satisfied by that, and I go back to the point that we made at the outset, that the targets are too far into the future. I'm reading the Chatham House report, I'm reading the IPCC report,
what the scientists are saying. We need action now, not in 10, 15 years' time. And we need global action, which includes the big players when it comes to coal. The methane thing is interesting, because when I first heard about that, I thought, well, this is agriculture being brought into the conversation. Because we know that, agriculture generally, if we factor in, loss of habitats, i.e. forests being cleared to produce agricultural areas, it can account for 34% of all the emissions, which is more than cars, planes, boats, everything. So agriculture, and the figures, you've got to be careful using these figures because they're quite tricky, but nevertheless, it's a significant player. So I thought, right, agriculture, that's going to lead to conversations about food. Are there going to be conversations about meat taxes, or encouraging people, or investing in farming so it can transition away from livestock into plant-based? I've heard nothing. I've heard nothing about that at all on the main stages. Plenty in the fringe events, of course, people talking about that sort of thing. But on the main stage, they seem to have stayed away from that.
Yeah. So if you were sat around that negotiating table, what would be some of your key demands?
Well, my first demand would be, as we've all been saying, that the action needs to be taken now.
Yeah.
So stop setting these far off targets, which will underperform, because they always underperform anyway. COP26 should have been about reinforcing the Paris Agreement, the Paris Accord. When we look at what's happened since Paris, very few of those targets have been met. Certainly none in terms of biodiversity, none in terms of dealing with equality, i.e. us paying for the poorer nations to do the work which we need them to do and they need to do for themselves. So I don't know, that it does to a great extent feel, but we've got to be patient, but it does at this point feel that, again, we've kicked it into the long grass. It's just that the grass is dying because it's not getting any rain, and it's going to be a parched desert and at some stage in the very near future.
We've got a question, or a comment here from Angela Bell, who says, how are the working class expected to find thousands for a new boiler, let alone save all year for an economy flight?
Well, they need government support.
Yeah,
that's what we need. We need to make sure that, to use an old-fashioned term, the welfare state is there for everyone. It's about equality again, isn't it? Really, we talk about the richer nations in the world paying for the poorer nations to implement the measures that are required for climate change. But in the UK, frankly, it's not about levelling up. It's about levelling down. It's about the people at the top paying more to support everyone being able to afford to go through that transition. And this idea that we put in positions like, you've got to buy a new boiler, you've got to do this, on a population which is already struggling in the aftermath of COVID and the economic crisis, is entirely improbable and improper. So much of this conversation is about inequality. And that's what we really need to deal with. And we're looking for governments all around the world for leadership here, and they've got to lead on that point. The wealth gap, I'm afraid, is just too big.
How do you think our leadership has been at this summit? Predictable,
I think, and inconsistent, and posturing, and not what we, but I suppose we focus more on our leadership because it's here. We focus more on less on the leadership of others that we've been observing, because they're probably playing away, as it were. But no, this is a critical time. This is a time where everyone in the world is looking to their elected representatives to represent them, to ensure that we have a sustainable or even regenerative, healthy future. And I don't think there can be terribly many people around the world at the moment who are satisfied at this point in time. I keep adding the proviso that we do have to allow the next couple of weeks to pan out and for the negotiations to finish, and then finally see what's on the drawing board. But I am sceptical that it's going to be meaningful, simply because the targets are too far ahead.
As we're chatting in here, there is huge protests going on outside. Thousands have taken to the streets because today is the focus on youth. What do you think about, so we've seen other protests recently by Insulate Britain, tactics such as gluing themselves to the roads and stopping the traffic, disrupting the public. There has been a lot of anger from the public. I don't know what anybody watching feels about that, but what are your thoughts on those kinds of tactics?
Okay, I think that in some ways we have to concede that those people are representing perhaps the way that we feel, but not the way that we act. I think that those people are doing that because they're terrified and they're frightened of their future. And therefore they are desperate to draw attention to that, the perilous nature of that future. And their method is to glue themselves to the road. To that extent, I will always sympathise with them, because I will see those as the braver people who are prepared to do something to say we are all in trouble. The thing is the method of communicating that to the rest of us. And I think that I obviously understand why people are extremely angry if they're, waylaid by people gluing themselves to the road. And what I would say to the protesters is we have to continue to retain our right for peaceful process, non-violent direct action. I think that's really important. The right to demonstrate must be preserved at all costs. However, we've got to do it in imaginative, innovative ways. I mean, I think there's only a certain number of times you can glue yourself to the road and it will get press attention, and you'll get people thinking, oh yeah, we've got to insulate our houses before they get annoyed. So I think when it comes to demonstrations, we need to constantly reinvent what we do. We don't use music. We don't use art, we don't use humour, all of these other things, or sport, all of these things that play into our lives that are important to us are not currently part of our portfolio when we invent means of demonstrating our concern. So I think that we activists, and I support some Extinction Rebellion actions and continue to do so, the ones that I think are appropriate. I pick and choose, as many people in Extinction Rebellion do. But I do think we've got to keep our finger on the pulse of public opinion, see how it's impacting the public and how they're responding. I mean, the last thing we want to do is alienate people. We're trying to bring them on board.
We've got a question on the screen from Lynn. Are there any countries that are getting things right? Costa Rica, it's a good example of a country that's managed to reverse its deforestation.
Indeed, yeah, Costa Rica. But I think we have to be, again, realistic. Costa Rica is a small Central American country full of very wealthy Americans because they retire there. It's been largely unravaged by deforestation for a number of historical reasons. I'm not in any way, not celebrating the fact that they're doing something positive, but it's like when people say to me, well, Norway's got 90% electric cars. Well, Norway's a very different country from the UK. And they've facilitated people getting electric cars in a way that we probably wouldn't have been able to do. So that's what I say. We can't expect everyone to achieve the same standards and targets at the same speed. We have to be tolerant of our own practical problems, and obviously celebrate others, but not chastise ourselves. I'm not saying for a moment that we didn't ought to start planting more native trees in the right place and reforest one of the most deforested parts of the world, the UK, 13% forest cover here, lowest in Western Europe, France 37 to 39%. And some parts of the UK have got the lowest number of trees per hectare of anywhere in Europe. So yes, we do need to start reforesting them, but it's no good just sticking them in the ground. You've got to nurture trees. They live a long time.
Absolutely. We've got loads of questions, so we'll try and whiz through as many as we can. Martin says, thank you for all that you do, Chris. How exactly can we put pressure on corporations, petrochemicals, to play their part?
Well, I think that, we've got the pound in our pocket, which is the first thing. It's a very powerful tool. So we can choose what we spend our money on when we are afforded a choice again, because some people have different, economic budgets. Then imagine that you want to make a choice, and it's a choice that you've decided you can afford. You need to be able to accumulate the right information to make that choice. And so I might argue, I go into a supermarket aisle, I want to eat something which I think is, sustainably harvested or grown. I look at the label, there's just no information there that allows me to make that choice. And I suppose when it comes to things like the petrochemical thing, the current sort of fix, or no, not a long-term fix, is obviously moving towards electrification, cars, using public transport, encouraging public transport to be more fossil fuel free as well. So a plethora of things, write to your council, why are we still using diesel buses? when an opportunity arises, see if you can invest in an electric car if the infrastructure is there. But this is again something that should be encouraged by government. There should be significant subsidies for people to switch. There should be significant investment of public money in putting the infrastructure in. Pressure put on the supermarkets. So I think supermarkets would be a great place for chargers because everyone goes to a supermarket, and yet some of our leading supermarkets, only 0.04% of their car parks have electric chargers in them. It's just not good enough.
Yeah. We should have some more questions coming up on the screen from our social media feeds. So Michael says, my question is, do you believe that humanity will evolve beyond our mundane concerns and desires and make it a better planet for us and everything on it? Or do you worry that it's already too late?
If it was too late, then I don't suppose I am a bit of a last stand. I probably would fight on even if I knew that we'd lost it. That's just my nature. But I know that out here we have a raft of technologies and practical abilities to make a difference. And if we had been implementing them, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in. And if we were implementing them more rapidly and more broadly, we would be making a difference now. We are enormously intelligent, adaptable, resourceful, inventive, innovative. We come up with solutions when we need to. We just came up with a vaccine for a disease which was virtually unknown in the space of, about 8 months or something. We can solve problems when we want to. At the moment, we're just not in a position where enough people want to solve this problem badly enough. And that is a problem. And I think that in the end we will. So I remain optimistic.
Another one here from Liz North. 2 questions, really. Have you met Greta? And she says, as an adult Aspie, I find both of you sometimes give me the strength to know that I'm not weird. I'm different and my difference can be my power. Do you agree with Greta that her Asperger's is a superpower, that the focus we can have is a natural bonus, especially as campaigners?
I think there is something about our temperament which leads us to be outspoken. My mother used to say long before, she knew, or she never got to know actually, that I was Asperger's. She would say that I was the most tactless boy on the planet because I couldn't stop myself saying what I thought. So there is that compulsion to say what we think. There's also a tremendous sense of resistance to injustice. We don't like people getting away with things. I didn't like it when my sister got away with things at the dinner table when I was a child. I really don't like it when people get away with things now that I see as wrong.
Yeah.
And also we're very task-centric and we're very obsessive and we can be very single-minded about issues. And I suppose all of those things together can come together in a creative way that will make us very determined campaigners. Do I think that it's a superpower? Well, what I say is that my Asperger's, as it was known, and I continue to use the phrase, is I see it as a gift, but that sometimes when you open it, you don't get what you want. So it can have a very positive side, but on occasion, it can have a negative side.
And she also asked if you have met Greta.
I haven't met Greta at all, and I look forward to that day. I think there's a number of people I'd like to meet and sit down, but not under the confines of a rapid 5-minute conversation in a car park. I think that these sorts of things would need to thrash out over the course of a weekend. And one thing to say is that very often people with my type of autism don't necessarily immediately get on with other people with a similar condition because when you get one single-minded person up against another single-minded person, if their single minds are not entirely overlapping, there can be a bit of friction. Having said that, I'm a great fan of Greta. I have enormous admiration for what she does and what she's done. I'm one of her greatest fans. There's no doubt about that.
I'm sure lots of people would like to see you guys chatting it all through together. Marion asks, what would you ask school children to do to make a difference? Many feel powerless as the decisions are made by adults. What would show them they can make a difference?
I think 2 things. Firstly, the single most important thing that young people need to realise is that they are important. and that they can empower themselves to make a difference. So I always say to them in a quite sort of a challenging way, get an alarm clock and set it 15 minutes earlier than you would normally get up. Quite a challenge for many young people. And in that 15 minutes, make a difference. And when you do, celebrate that difference. Know that you've done something. Applaud yourself. Feel good about yourself. And when you get to that position about feeling good about yourself because you've changed something and you've done something positive, then when you do that and you tell your family or you tell your classmates or you tell your community and they do it too, it's not an individual thing, it's a community thing. And that again leads to another surge of empowerment. And then the second thing I would say is that it's high time that crusty old people like myself, and certainly all of those in government who might be a little bit crustier and older, entrusted young people to do things. Young people have fantastic ideas. They've got tremendous energy. They've got ambition. They have a real need to make a difference at this point because they're frightened about their future, justifiably so. And I think that we should allow them more of a voice and to be able to take more decisions. So I would give young people far more opportunities to be involved in this process of change than they currently have.
We've got time for just a few more. Janet asks, I'm sure it'll be the younger generations who will put pressure on the older ones to change their ways, as hard as that is. We are the ones with the spending power. It just needs to be directed to the right places. What 3 things would you suggest to youngsters to push us to do this with our money over the remainder of this critical decade?
Well, firstly, we are very fortunate in the UK that the vast majority of us get to eat every day. Perhaps not as much and as much nutrition as we need to get, but we've already spoken about inequality and so on and so forth. And thankfully, we have people like Marcus Rashford who've been taking a brilliant lead on dealing with some of the issues when it comes to food and young people. Brilliant bloke. Massive fan of his as well. But everything that we put in our mouth connects us with nature every single day. That has come out of the soil, it's been grown somewhere, or it's been harvested from the sea or harvested somewhere, and that connects us to the natural world. And generally, although my mum used to force me to eat things I didn't want to eat, but we generally choose what we put in our mouths, and that can have a profound impact. So the first thing to think about, and we know that this is we need to address, is eating less meat. If you cut your meat down, think about where the meat that you do eat comes from. Is it coming from a sustainable source? Is it coming from a source where there are good standards of animal welfare? Is it coming from the other side of the world when there's a local alternative available? Again, food is quite tricky because there are lots of different price points. There are lots of different reasons why people have to eat different things. But I still believe that within that, we can make choices and we can afford to make choices which are more sustainable. So food is the one thing to very definitely look at. I think the next thing is, and it's close to my heart, of course, is understanding that nature isn't just there because people like me want to go and look at it and love it. Nature is there because we need it. We're part of it. It serves us. And therefore, we must nurture and protect it. It provides us with mental health benefits in our communities. And nature isn't tropical rainforest, isn't the Antarctic waste. It's not even the nature reserve that's 50 miles away from you. Nature is in your space. It's on your window box. It's in your garden. It's in your school ground or local park. And all of those places, I think, can work better for nature. So we should be thinking about how we can, if we own that window box garden and we should become involved and have a voice about what happens in the local park, then we can shape those to be better for nature. And that will benefit us too, because we know what happened in lockdown. Everyone listened to the bird song, looked at the wildflowers, and it helped so many people get through a really difficult period. So that's a multifaceted and useful objective. And then the last thing is that if our elected representatives fail us and they don't deliver on what they need to do, we need to be able to democratically, politely and peacefully raise our voices and ask for change. Don't be afraid of doing that. We are the citizens of this planet. We have every right, and in many places on the planet, we have the freedom to express our voices. And very sadly, in some parts, you can't do that. But here we can, and that puts even more onus on us to stand up and say, no, we voted for you. we want you to do this to protect our future. Please use that voice. You don't have to join a demonstration. You don't need a placard. You don't have to scream and shout. You can do that on your phone keypad or your laptop, your computer, or with a pen and paper. But do communicate your disgruntlement to the people who can make a difference. That's
one of the most powerful things we can do, I think, isn't it? So Jackie says, teaching kids about flora and fauna with enthusiasm starts in the home. Is there enough of this in schools?
Schools, for me, are the key, because they're a trusted environment where the vast majority of people from all sections of society go, and therefore we've kind of got them. They're in one place to be educated. Now, it's difficult integrating education, natural education into people's homes, because you've got multitudes of different cultures and parents and guardians and so on and so forth with different interests, but everyone goes to school. So I think investing in environmental education in schools is absolutely critical. And the one thing that we've got to address, which we haven't addressed, shamefully, again on my watch, is making sure that it's fully inclusive. And that we cater for all of the diversity in our UK society. Because unfortunately, we still see principal interests in, what should we say, conservation and natural history in the sort of white middle class sector. And it's not a white middle class preserve. It's there for everyone. It's brilliant for everyone. It's healthy for everyone. And everyone needs it to work. And so, therefore, schools, again, I think is absolutely critical. More resources need to be available. This is not saying to teachers, you're not doing your job. What we're saying is that we have to facilitate those teachers changing their job and invest in them so that they are in a position to provide that education.
Let's try and sneak one more in. Joanne asks, are the government not being hypocritical in speaking at a summit on climate change when here in the UK we're devouring the countryside, ripping up trees, hundreds of years old for HS2?
Yes, of course they are. Again, we went into this with them sanctioning further fossil fuel exploration, oil fields in the North Sea, the potential of building a coal mine in Cumbria, and the ongoing juggernaut of HS2 ripping through 108 ancient woodlands. All of these things spell hypocrisy, and we are justifiably frustrated and angered by them. And that's why we've got to get to our keyboards and do what we've just said. We are empowered to say no. And some of us have been trying to say no to these things, but the more people that do, in a polite, reasonable, rational and democratic way, then the more strength to our elbow. And eventually, of course, when votes depend on it, they will change their course of action.
Yeah, I think it's important that we kind of end on a bit of a positive note of something that is very overwhelming, and there are lots of people who are very frightened about the situation at the moment. Can you just leave us with a reason we should be positive, and what keeps you going?
It's not difficult, and there are a couple. Firstly, out here somewhere in the streets of Glasgow, we can't hear or see them at the moment from our perch in this building. There are enormous numbers of young people who have given up their time and energy to come out on a chilly Glasgow day to say that they want change. And that is inspiring. That I find that tremendously exciting. That is, a breeding ground for hope. And the second thing is, I have touched upon this, that we have the solutions. It's not that we're up against a problem which is hopeless, because there's nothing we can do. We know that we've got a raft of abilities to restore nature and address the amount of carbon that's being pumped into our atmosphere. It's just that we're not doing them rapidly enough and broadly enough. And if we were to do that, our problems would begin to be solved. I'm not saying there wouldn't still be changes. Of course there will. There's a lag and we know it. But nevertheless, that sort of adaptation would give us a healthier future. The situation is not beyond repair. It's not hopeless, but we must fix it now.
Thank you so much, Chris. I think that's a good place to stop. I'm really sorry if we didn't get to all of your questions. Thank you for sending them all in. And yes, thanks for watching. See you next time.